madness. He was smoking a cigarette. "He came in shooting, took down Laura and Gwyn. Highsmith is dead, too. We haven't found George Bear yet." I knelt and quickly checked the damage to Oliver Highsmith's skull. It wasn't subtle. He had been shot at point-blank range, and the wound was massive. I knew from Jones that Schaefer had resented the senior man's intelligence, and now he'd blown out his brains. "I told you he liked to kill. He has to do this, Andrew. He can't stop." "Whitehead," I said. "The end of the game." We drove faster than the narrow, twisting road safely allowed, barreling toward James Whitehead's home. It wasn't far. We passed a road sign that read, "Mallard's Beach, San Antonio." Sampson and I were quiet, lost in our own thoughts. I kept thinking of Christine. Couldn't stop the images from coming. We have her. Was that still true? I didn't know, and only Schaefer or possibly Whitehead could give me the answer. I wanted to keep both of them alive if I could. Everything about the island, the exotic smells and sights, reminded me of Christine. I tried, but I couldn't imagine a good conclusion to any of this. We headed toward the beach, and soon were skimming past private houses and a few very large estates, some with long, winding driveways that stretched 100 yards or more from the road to the main house. In the distance, I could see the glow of other house lights, and I figured we had to be close to James Whitehead's. Was War still alive, or had Schaefer already come and gone? Jones' voice came in spits over the radio. "This is his place, Alex. Glass and stone house up ahead. I don't see anybody." We pulled in near the crushed seashell driveway leading to the house. It was dark, pitch black and satiny. There were no lights on anywhere on the property. We jumped out of our cars. There were 8 of us in all, including one team of detectives from Kingston, Kenyon and Anthony, both of whom were acting nervous. I didn't blame them. I felt exactly the same way. The Weasel was on a rampage, and we already knew he was suicidal. Jeffrey Schaefer was a homicidal, suicidal maniac. Sampson and I ran through a small garden that had a pool and cabana area on one side, and an expanse of lawn and sea on the other. We could see Jones's people beginning to fan out across the grounds. Schaefer came into the hotel with guns blazing, I thought. He doesn't seem to care whether or not he survives. But I do. I need to question him. I have to know what he knows. I need all the answers. "What about this prick Whitehead?" Sampson asked as we hurried toward the house. It was dark near the water, a good place for Schaefer to attack from. Dark shadows stretched out from every tree and bush. "I don't know, John. He was at the hotel briefly. He's a player, so he's after Schaefer too. This is it. Endgame. One of them wins the game now." "He's here," I whispered. "I know it." I could definitely sense Jeffrey Schaefer's presence. I was sure of it. And the fact that I knew scared me almost as much as he himself did. Shots sounded from the darkened house. My heart sank, and I had the most disturbing and contradictory thought. Please don't let Jeffrey Schaefer be dead.
One more target, one last opponent, and then it will be over. 8 glorious years of play, 8 years of revenge, 8 years of hatred. He couldn't bear to lose the game. He'd shown Bear and Highsmith a thing or two. Now he'd demonstrate to James Whitehead which of them was truly superior. Schaefer had noisily crashed through thick foliage, then waded waist-deep into a foul-smelling swamp. The water was distressingly tepid, and the oily green scum on the surface was an inch or 2 thick. He tried not to think about the swamp, or the insects and snakes that might infest it. He'd waded into far worse waters during his days and nights in Asia. He kept his eyes set on James Whitehead's expensive beach house. One more to go. Just one more horseman. He'd been to the villa before, knew it well. Beyond the swamp was another patch of thick foliage, then a chain-link fence and Whitehead's manicured yard. He figured that Whitehead wouldn't expect him to come through the swamp. War was cleverer than the others, though. He'd been committing murders in the Caribbean for years, and not even a blip had shown up to suggest a pattern to the police. War had also helped him in the matter of Christine Johnson, and that had gone perfectly. It was a mystery inside a mystery. All inside a complex game. Schaefer lost track of everything real for a moment or two, where he was, who he was, what he had to do. Now that was scary. A little mental breakdown at the worst possible time. Ironically, it was Whitehead who had first gotten him dependent on uppers and downers in Asia. Schaefer began to slosh across the fetid swamp, hoping the water wouldn't be over his head. It wasn't. He came out and climbed over the chain-link fence on the far side. He started across the back lawn. He had the most powerful obsession about destroying James Whitehead. He wanted to torture him. But where would he find the time? Whitehead had been his first handler in Thailand, and then in the Philippines. More than anyone, Whitehead had made Schaefer into a killer. Whitehead was the one he held responsible. The house was still dark, but Schaefer believed War was in there. Suddenly a gun fired from the house. War, indeed. Schaefer began to zig and zag like an infantryman thoroughly trained in combat. His heart was thundering. Reality came in odd stop-and-go movements. He wondered if Whitehead had a night-scope on his gun, and how good a shot he was, whether he'd ever been in combat. Was he frightened, or was he excited by the action? He figured that the doors to the house were locked and that War was crouched low, hiding inside, waiting to take a shot without too much exposure. He had never done his own dirty work, though. None of them had. Not Whitehead, not Bayer, not Highsmith. They had used death, and now he'd come for them. If they hadn't agreed to meet in Jamaica, he would have come after them, one at a time. Schaefer broke into a full sprint towards the house. Gunshots exploded from inside. Bullets whizzed past him. He hadn't been hit because he was so good, or because War wasn't. Schaefer threw both arms up in front of his face. This was it. He dived through the large picture window in the loggia. Glass exploded everywhere as the window blew into 1,000 small pieces. He was inside. War was here, close by. Where was his enemy? How good was James Whitehead? His mind was filled with important questions. A dog was barking somewhere in the house. Schaefer tumbled across the tiled floor and hit the leg of a heavy table, but came up firing anyway. Nothing. No one was in the room. He heard voices outside, in front. The police were here, always trying to spoil his fun. Then he saw War, trying to run. Tall, gangly, with longish black hair. War had blinked first. He was heading towards the front door, looking for help from the police of all people. "You can't make it, Whitehead! Stop! I won't let you get out! Stay in the game!" Whitehead apparently realized he couldn't get out the front door. He turned towards the stairway, and Schaefer followed, only a few steps behind. War turned sharply and fired again. Schaefer flicked his hand at a wall switch, and the hall lights flashed on. "Death has come for you! It's your time! Look at me! Look at death!" he screamed. Whitehead kept moving, and Schaefer calmly shot him in the buttocks. The wound was large, gaping, and Whitehead screamed like a stuck pig. He whirled and fell halfway down the stairs. His face slammed against the metal railing as he fell. He finally lay writhing at the foot of the stairs where Schaefer shot him again, this time between the legs. War screamed again. Then he began to moan and to sob. Schaefer stood over him, triumphant, his heart bursting. "You think sanctions are a game? Is this still a game to you?" he asked in the softest voice. "I believe it's great fun. But do you?" Whitehead was sobbing as he tried to speak. "No, Geoffrey, it's not a game. Please, stop. That's enough." Schaefer began to smile. He showed his enormous teeth. "Oh, you're so wrong. It's lovely. It's the most amazing mind game you could imagine. You should feel what I feel right now, the power over life and death." He had a thought, and it changed everything, changed the game for him and Whitehead. This switch was so much better than what he had originally planned. "I've decided to let you live. Not very well, but you will live." He fired the semi-automatic again, this time into the base of Whitehead's spine. "You will never forget me, and the game will continue for the rest of your life. Play well. I know I shall."
The moment we heard the gunshots, we ran toward the main house. I raced ahead of the others. I had to get to Schaefer before they did. I had to take him myself. I had to talk to him to know the truth once and for all. I saw Schaefer slip out a side door of the house. Whitehead must be dead. Schaefer had won the game. He was running toward the sea, moving fast and purposefully. He disappeared behind a small sand dune shaped like a turtle. Where was he going? What was next for him? Then I saw him again. He was kicking off his shoes and getting out of his trousers. What was he doing? I heard Samson come running up behind me. "Don't kill him, John. Not unless we have to," I yelled. I know, he called. I plunged ahead. Schaefer turned and fired off a shot at me. The distance was too great for any real accuracy with a handgun, but still, he was a good shot. And he came pretty close. He knew how to use a gun, and not just from a few feet away. I glanced over and saw that Samson was kicking off his sneakers, pulling away his pants. I did the same with my sweats and T-shirt. I pointed out to sea. "He must have a boat out there, one of those." We saw Schaefer striding into the low waves of the Caribbean, heading into a cone of light made by the moon. He did a shallow dive and started to swim in a smooth-looking crawl stroke. Samson and I were down to our underwear. Nothing very pretty. We both made shallow dives into the sea. Schaefer was a very strong swimmer and was already pulling ahead of us. He swam with his face in the water, lifting it out sideways after several strokes to catch a breath. His blonde hair was slicked back and shone in the moonlight. One of the boats bobbing out there had to be his, but which one? I kept a single thought in my head. Stretch and kick, stretch and kick. I felt as if I were gathering strength from somewhere inside. I had to catch Schaefer. I had to know the truth about what he'd done to Christine. Stretch and kick, stretch and kick. Samson was laboring behind me, and then he started to fall even farther back. "Go," I called back to him. "Go back for help. I'll be all right. Get somebody out there to check those boats." "He swims like a fish," Samson shouted back. "Go, I'll be fine. Hold my own." Up ahead, I could still see Schaefer's head and the tops of his shoulders, glistening in the creamy white moonlight. He was stroking evenly, powerfully. I kept going, never looking back to shore, not wanting to know how far I had come already. I refused to be tired, to give up, to lose. I swam harder, trying to gain some sea on Schaefer. The boats were still a good way away. He was still going strong, though, no sign of tiring. I played a mind game of my own. I stopped looking to see where he was. I concentrated only on my own stroke. There was nothing but the stroke. The stroke was the whole universe. My body was feeling more in sync with the water, and I was buoyed as it got deeper. My stroke was getting stronger, smoother. I finally looked. He was starting to struggle. Or maybe that was just what I wanted to see. Anyway, it gave me a second wind, added strength. What if I actually caught him out here? Then what? We'd fight to the death? I couldn't let him get to his boat before me. He'd have guns on board. I needed to beat him there. I had to win this time. Which boat was his? I swam harder. I told myself that I was in good shape, too. And I was. I had been in the gym every day for almost a year, ever since Christine disappeared. I looked up again, and I was shocked at what I saw. Schaefer was there, only a few yards away. A few more strokes. Had he lost it? Or was he waiting for me, gathering strength? The closest boat was no more than 150 yards away.
"Cramp!"
He called out.
"Bad one!"
Then Schaefer went under. I didn't know what to think, or exactly what to do next. The pain on Schaefer's face looked real. He looked afraid, but he was also a good actor. I felt something underneath me. He grabbed hard between my legs. I yelled and managed to twist away, though he'd hurt me. Then we were grabbing at each other, struggling, like underwater wrestlers. Suddenly, he pulled me under with him. He was strong. His long arms were like powerful vices. He held me tightly. We went down. I started to feel the coldest, most serious fear of my life. I didn't want to drown. Schaefer was winning. He always found a way. Schaefer stared into my eyes. His eyes were incredibly intense and manic and crazed. His mouth was closed, but it was twisted and evil-looking. He had me. He would win again. I pushed forward as hard as I could. When I felt him straining against me, I reversed directions. I kicked out with my leg and caught Schaefer under the jaw, maybe in the throat. I hit him with all of my strength, and he began to sink. His long blonde hair floated up around his face. His arms and legs went limp. He began to sink, and I followed him. It was even darker under the surface. I grabbed one of his arms. I barely caught him. His weight was pulling me with him toward the bottom. I couldn't let him go. I had to know the truth about Christine. I couldn't go on with my life unless I knew. I had no idea how deep the water was here. Schaefer's eyes had been wide open, and so had his mouth. His lungs must be filling with water by now. I wondered if I'd broken his neck